Have you ever noticed how your mind doesn't really wait for something to happen? It just starts running on its own? Like you're not even doing anything, just brushing your teeth or staring out the window, and suddenly it's juggling 5 things at once. What you forgot to say, what you might need to do, that awkward moment from years ago, a random plan for next week, a big, vague question about whether you're where you're supposed to be in life. None of it's urgent. None of it's connected. And yet it fills the whole space, like your brain just didn't know what else to do with the quiet. And the odd thing is, we've kind of accepted that as normal. We're so used to the noise in our heads that when things actually get still, it feels off, like something's missing, like we've slipped out of rhythm with the rest of the world. So we reach for something to think about, just to feel like we're doing something. But maybe thinking all the time isn't really doing something. Maybe it's just our way of avoiding what's underneath. The silence, the space, the part of us that doesn't always have answers but might be okay with that. And maybe that's not a problem to fix. Maybe it's just something worth noticing. In this video, you'll learn why constant thinking keeps you stuck, how to reclaim your attention, and why silence might be the most powerful decision you make today. If this message speaks to something inside you, don't scroll past it. Subscribe, reflect, and if you've been living in mental overdrive, share your story below. You're not alone, and this might be your turning point. 1. Overthinking feels productive, but it's not Torah. There's a strange satisfaction in staying busy inside your own head. You sit down to rest, but your mind refuses. It spins, plans, replays, prepare, until exhaustion feels like effort and the tension feels like control. That's the trap of overthinking. It mimics progress while silently draining you. I once spent hours preparing for a job interview, imagining every question, every possible twist, and every worst-case scenario. By the time the day arrived, I was mentally burnt out before I even walked through the door. What I thought was preparation was actually anxiety, rehearsing failure. Overthinking doesn't feel like fear. It feels like responsibility. It makes you think you're being thorough, wise, and ready. But what you're really doing is running simulations of events that haven't happened, conversations that won't occur, outcomes that don't exist. And the more you do it, the more it becomes your baseline. You confuse movement with momentum, thinking with awareness. But awareness is sharp, precise, and grounded. Overthinking is messy, circular, and frantic. It solves nothing and adds weight to everything. That's the hidden cost. Your brain is spending energy without direction. You end up tired but no wiser. You rehearse instead of responding. You loop instead of live. You carry 5 problems in your mind that don't even belong to this moment. And yet it feels productive because your mind is busy. And we've been taught that busyness means value. But thinking isn't the enemy. Constant, compulsive thinking is, because it keeps you distracted from what actually is. When you're overthinking, you're not really present. You're mentally split between past regrets and future fears, and your body pays the price. Your sleep suffers, your mood shifts, your breath shortens, your ability to respond with clarity disappears, buried beneath the noise. The Stoics understood this thousands of years ago. They knew the danger of a mind that never pauses. Epictetus wrote, "We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them." And judgment happens when thought runs wild, unchecked, unexamined. So they trained themselves not to think less, but to think right. Not to worry constantly about what's outside their control, but to focus on what they could govern. Their choices, their responses, and their discipline. It's not about turning off your thoughts, it's about choosing which ones deserve space. And that requires silence, space between reactions, breathing room for the truth to emerge, not the noisy, rehearsed version, but the quiet, grounded one. And this is where modern minds struggle, because we're addicted to stimulation. We mistake noise for awareness. But the moment you stop feeding your thoughts with attention, something powerful happens. You notice how many of them are unnecessary. How many are just recycled fear dressed as preparation? How many are habits, not insight? You don't need to solve everything in your mind before you act. Life isn't a chess match. You won't outthink uncertainty. What you can do is slow down enough to see clearly and act from clarity, not chaos. Because true readiness doesn't come from obsessive rehearsal. It comes from a grounded presence. It comes when you stop trying to predict every outcome and start trusting your ability to respond to whatever comes. So the next time your mind spirals, stop. Don't push back. Don't add more noise. Just pause. Feel your breath. Notice the weight in your chest. Let the thought pass like a train you don't need to board. And when you do this often enough, you'll begin to realize that most of what your mind throws at you is not urgent, not true, and not yours to carry. Overthinking is not a virtue. Stillness is not a weakness. And clarity? It was never hiding. It was just waiting for you to stop running. Stillness isn't laziness, it's wisdom. If you've ever felt guilty for slowing down, you're not alone, but you're also not thinking clearly. We live in a world that worships motion, rewards speed, and praises those who never seem to stop. But the truth is, you're not a machine, and even machines shut down to avoid burning out. Your mind, like your body, wasn't designed for constant acceleration. At some point, stillness becomes not just necessary, but wise. There's a difference between doing nothing and being deeply present. One is neglect, the other is power. But when every message around you tells you to hustle harder, to optimize every second, to fill the silence with productivity, choosing to pause feels wrong. Like weakness, like you're falling behind. Yet what if that stillness was actually the space where clarity lives? What if stopping didn't mean losing, but regaining control? Most people don't realize they're running on autopilot, not because they're efficient, but because they're afraid of what they might feel if they stop. Stillness strips away the noise. It removes the excuse of being busy and replaces it with truth. And truth, for many, is uncomfortable. Stillness doesn't mean you're not progressing. It means you're becoming precise. It allows your nervous system to reset, your thoughts to settle, and your awareness to rise without force. In moments of real pause, you're not wasting time. You're watching it. You're stepping out of the mental treadmill and standing still long enough to see where it's actually going. And that shift changes everything. Because once you've experienced what true calm feels like, anxiety doesn't control you the same way. You stop chasing mental stimulation just to feel alive. You begin to understand that most of what you label as important is noise amplified by motion. You start noticing how fast your attention runs from one thing to the next, not because you choose to, but because you've trained your mind to fear stillness. But wisdom doesn't shout. It waits. It's in the breath you've been skipping. It's in the pause before a reaction. It's in the space between impulses where your power actually lives. And it doesn't demand anything from you except your presence. Stillness teaches you how to observe without judgment, to listen without interruption, and to act without desperation. It's in those silent moments that insight emerges, not because you chased it, but because you finally made room for it to speak. You can't force mental clarity through the force of thought. You earn it by creating space. When you choose stillness, you reclaim your attention. You step outside the loop of constant evaluation and reaction, and you start responding with intention. You stop trying to be everywhere mentally, and you finally arrive where you are physically. And that alignment? That's what strength feels like when it's quiet. It takes courage to be still in a world addicted to motion. It takes discipline to resist the pressure to do something just for the sake of doing it. And it takes wisdom to recognize that rest isn't escape, it's strategy. So if you feel pulled to slow down, listen. That's not weakness speaking. That's your awareness of asking for a seat at the table. And if the world calls it laziness, let it. Stillness doesn't need applause to prove its worth. Because the most powerful decisions you'll ever make won't come from racing thoughts or chaotic action. They'll come from the silence you once feared, and now understand. 3. Most of your thoughts aren't even yours. There are beliefs inside your head that you never chose, goals you're chasing that you never questioned, and standards you hold yourself to that were whispered into your mind long before you ever realized they could be optional. Maybe someone once laughed at the way you looked, so now every mirror feels like a threat. Maybe your parents measured success by money, so now you flinch every time your bank account drops. Maybe society told you that happiness looks like a house, a title, a number, so now you can't sit still without feeling left behind. And yet none of these thoughts were born in silence. They were planted, repeated, reinforced, until they sounded like your own voice. But repetition is not truth. Familiarity isn't clarity. Just because you've thought something 1,000 times doesn't mean it's worth believing once. This is why most people live on autopilot, not because they're careless, but because they've never stopped to ask where their beliefs come from. We inherit judgments like old clothes. Some fit, some never did. And yet we keep wearing them, even when they chafe against who we've become. That quiet pressure to live a certain way, succeed by a certain age, look a certain part, it's not instinct. It's programming. Mental conditioning goes unnoticed because it arrived so early and stayed so long. You don't have to think about those thoughts forever. That voice that says you're behind, that you're not enough, that you need to prove something to matter. That voice might not be yours at all. It might belong to a teacher who never saw you, a parent who couldn't love without expectations, a culture that profits off your insecurity. And the moment you realize that, the grip loosens. You stop reacting to every mental notification. You begin to trace your thoughts back, not to truth, but to origin. And when you see where they come from, you also see what you no longer need to carry. This is where Stoicism becomes practical, because it teaches you not just how to think, but how to question what you think. It invites you to separate what's internal from what's external, what's essential from what's inherited. A Stoic doesn't chase every thought. He filters. He pauses. He examines whether this belief serves his character or sabotages his peace. He understands that discipline isn't just about action, it's about attention, about not giving energy to mental noise that doesn't lead to clarity or virtue. So how do you apply this? You start by catching the voice before you obey it. When your mind tells you you're not doing enough, you stop and ask, according to whose standards? When it says you're not as good as someone else, you ask, what scale am I even using? When it tells you to keep pushing, even though you're exhausted, you pause and ask, is this purpose or pressure? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're invitations to reclaim your inner world from voices that never earned the right to live there. Most of your stress doesn't come from reality. It comes from interpretations layered with inherited noise. You're not failing. You're filtering through expectations you never examined. And when you begin to see that, something shifts. You stop blaming yourself for feeling lost. You stop hustling to become a version of yourself that someone else designed. And slowly, quietly, you return to yourself. Not the self they trained, but the self you've always been, underneath the static. So if you're exhausted, not just from life, but from your own mind, maybe the first step isn't to think harder. Maybe it's to listen deeper. Not to the loudest voice, but to the one that's been waiting, beneath the shoulds, the noise, the pressure, to be heard again. The one that knows you don't need to become anything more to be at peace. You just need to stop believing everything that never belonged to you. 4. You don't need to solve everything right now. There's a quiet kind of panic that sneaks in when life feels unresolved. An argument was left open. A decision has not yet been made. A future you can't predict. Your mind scrambles to find an answer, any answer, just to escape the discomfort of not knowing. But here's what no one tells you. Not every problem is meant to be solved today. Some things are still unfolding. Some truths are still forming. Forcing a conclusion too early isn't clarity. It's control dressed as urgency. Think about the last time you had a serious conversation with someone close. A spouse, a parent, a friend. Maybe it didn't go the way you wanted. Maybe words were said, emotions ran high, and by the end of it you sat there, heart racing, mind spinning, wondering what to do next. Your instinct was probably to fix it right then. To text, to call, to explain. But sometimes stepping back isn't retreating, it's restraint. Because clarity doesn't rush, it rises in silence after the storm has passed. This is where most people get trapped, mistaking immediacy for importance. The mind hates loose ends. It wants closure, answers, and a tidy conclusion. But life doesn't work like that. Not every emotion needs to be understood right away. Not every conflict needs to be resolved in one breath. Some wounds need air before they can close. Some decisions become clearer only when you stop demanding clarity and start giving it space to surface. From a Stoic lens, this is the discipline of delay. The strength to pause, to observe your internal reaction without obeying it. Marcus Aurelius wrote of training the mind to wait, to let impressions settle before you attach meaning. When something disturbs you, it's not the thing itself. It's your immediate judgment of it. And judgment born in haste is rarely wise. That's why the wisest response often looks like no response at all. Not out of passivity, but out of patience. You don't have to fix your relationship tonight. You don't have to figure out your career path before the weekend. You don't need a perfect plan to move forward. Sometimes just staying still and not making it worse is progress. In fact, the pressure to do something now is often the very thing that blocks better outcomes. Because when you act from fear, guilt, or restlessness, you're not really solving, you're escaping. And escape never builds peace, it only postpones it. When you feel like you need to do something, pause instead. Ask yourself, what emotion is driving me right now? Am I reacting to fear or responding from presence? Am I solving or scrambling? These aren't small questions. They separate chaos from clarity. And clarity, as every Stoic knew, is only possible when you stop rushing to reach it. In everyday life, this shows up everywhere. You get a job offer, but something feels off. You can't explain it yet, but instead of forcing a yes or no, you give it a night. You're in the middle of a tense negotiation, and rather than fill the silence, you let it breathe. You feel like quitting something, but you wait until the feeling fades to see what remains. In all of this, you're not delaying out of fear. You're allowing space for wisdom to enter. So the next time your mind tells you, we need to fix this now, pause. Not everything urgent is important. Not everything unresolved is broken. Let things settle before you speak. Let your nervous system catch up before you decide. Because sometimes the most powerful move isn't to act, it's to wait with intention. And that kind of discipline doesn't just change how you handle problems, it changes how you live. 5. The best decisions come from calm, not chaos. When everything feels urgent, when your chest is tight and your thoughts are tangled, it's easy to believe that deciding fast means deciding well. But pressure doesn't create wisdom, it creates noise. I've learned this the hard way. I once made a major business choice on the back of 2 sleepless nights, too many emails, and a deadline that felt like a threat. I sighed. It looked smart on paper, it felt decisive. But days later, when my body finally slowed down, my clarity returned, and I realized I had said yes for all the wrong reasons. I wasn't calm, I was cornered, and chaos had made my mind a stranger. We like to imagine that high-pressure decisions build strong leaders. That real strength means choosing under fire, moving fast, and keeping up. But speed is not clarity, and urgency is not truth. Most of the worst choices we make come from a place of fear. Fear of missing out, fear of letting someone down, fear of seeming weak. So we rush and we react. But the Stoics never rushed. They knew that emotion clouds reason. A calm mind is the only mind that can see things as they are. So they trained themselves to wait, to breathe, to create space between stimulus and response. In that space, wisdom has a chance to speak. Because real knowing doesn't arrive with panic. It arrives in the stillness that follows it. That's why some of the most important decisions you'll ever make won't come to you while staring at a screen or talking in circles. They'll come on a walk, in the silence of your room, in the pause after the pressure fades. You can't think clearly when your nervous system is hijacked. Stress narrows your focus. It makes you reactive, not reflective. And in that state, even smart people lose perspective. That's why clarity often sounds like quiet. It doesn't shout for your attention. It waits for you to calm down enough to hear it. If you've ever solved a problem in the shower or woken up with the answer that escaped you the night before, you've experienced this. The solution was always there. It just needed the noise to stop. And the same applies to bigger choices, the ones that shape your life. Where you live, who you commit to, what you build. These aren't decisions to be made in the rush of other people's expectations. They belong to your stillest self. You don't have to figure everything out in a moment of chaos. In fact, that's the worst time to decide. When the pressure rises, step back. When your emotions spike, stay silent. When your mind screams for action, wait for the whisper of clarity. That's not a weakness. That's wisdom choosing its timing. And you'll notice something interesting when you do. Urgency begins to lose its power. You stop being manipulated by pressure. You start trusting your own internal compass. Because now, you're not just reacting, you're responding with presence, with intention, with power. So the next time life demands an answer, give yourself the gift of pause. Don't let panic speak for you. Don't let noise push you into decisions that your calm self would never make. Go outside. Move your body. Sit in silence. Let your thoughts settle like dust in the water. Then ask yourself from stillness, not survival, what truly feels right. Because the best decisions don't come from needing to escape discomfort. They come from being centered enough to face it without flinching. And in that place, you're no longer choosing just to survive. You're choosing who you are becoming. 6. Silence isn't empty, it's full of answers. We've been conditioned to fear silence as if it's the space where meaning disappears. But silence isn't the absence of life, it's where life finally speaks without interruption. The modern mind avoids it at all costs. We drown it out with background music, scrolling, notifications, with noise that pretends to be comfort. But comfort isn't always what you need. Sometimes, the discomfort of stillness is exactly what breaks the mental loop. And when you stop running from it, something profound begins to happen. You realize silence was never empty. It was just waiting for your attention to return. At first, you'll resist. Sit in a room alone, with no phone, no sound, no distractions, and your thoughts will rise like smoke from a fire you didn't know was burning. The impulse to move, to check something, to do anything will crawl under your skin. But that discomfort isn't a flaw. It's a signal. Your nervous system, trained by overstimulation, doesn't know what to do with peace. But keep sitting, keep breathing, and slowly the surface noise begins to fade. The racing thoughts slow, the anxiety loosens its grip, and in that quiet, deeper thoughts start to surface. The kind you've been too busy to hear. This is where insight lives. Not in the chaos, not in the rush, but in the gap between your impulses. When there's nothing left to distract you, your mind finally has space to align with your deeper knowing. Stoics understood this intimately. They didn't seek silence as a luxury, they saw it as necessary. A disciplined withdrawal from the noise of the world to reconnect with the wisdom within. Because you can't hear your inner compass when the outer world is screaming. And the more you fill the silence, the more disconnected you become from your own voice. We've normalized constant thinking as a sign of intelligence. But mental clarity doesn't grow in clutter. It grows in stillness. Like a pond that settles only when the ripples stop, your awareness sharpens when thought stops rushing in every direction. The quiet moments, early morning, late at night, in nature or in solitude, aren't boring. They're the bridge back to balance. They're where resilience builds, where you remember you don't need more input, you need more space to process what's already there. Try 10 minutes. No music, no podcast, no screen, just you and silence. At first it might feel pointless, then frustrating, but if you stay with it, something shifts. You begin to see patterns in your thoughts. You notice how often your mind defaults to worry, to planning, to replaying conversations that no longer matter. And you realize not all of that noise is necessary. Much of it is conditioning, habit, a reflex to avoid presence. But presence is where power lives. It's where clarity emerges, not as a reward, but as a return. This kind of silence doesn't shout solutions, it reveals them gently. You won't get instant answers, but you'll gain something better: perspective. You'll respond less, react less. You'll begin to see what actually deserves your energy and what never did. And once you've experienced that kind of clarity, distraction starts to lose its appeal. The noise stops being addictive, because now you know what it was keeping you from. So, if your world feels overwhelming, don't just add more to your plate. Remove the noise. Step into silence, not as an escape, but as a practice. Not because you're lost, but because silence is how you return. You don't need to fill every space to feel alive. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop, be still, and listen. Because underneath the clutter, the questions, the mental race, there's a truth waiting. And silence is how you find it. 7. You are not your thoughts, you're the one noticing them. A thought is not a command, it's not a verdict, it's not even the truth. A thought is a ripple, temporary, moving, often without direction. And yet we live as if every thought deserves our full obedience. We hear a negative idea in our mind and immediately assume it's real. We feel fear and assume there's danger. We feel doubt and assume we're failing. But what if you didn't have to believe every thought that showed up? What if the voice inside your head wasn't the narrator of your life, but just noise passing through? Years ago, when I was first learning to meditate, my teacher told me something I'll never forget. You are not the cloud, you are the sky. That one sentence rewired something deep. Suddenly, I realized I didn't have to chase every thought that floated in. I could notice it, name it, and let it go. In the same way, the sky doesn't fight the weather. You don't need to fight your thoughts. You just need to stop mistaking them for who you are. This shift in awareness changes everything. Instead of being trapped inside your thinking, you step back and see it. You become the observer, and the observer has power. The observer doesn't panic when a thought says, "You're not enough." It watches. The observer doesn't spiral when fear says you're about to fail. It stays present because it knows a thought has no meaning unless you attach to it. This is where Stoicism becomes a weapon against mental noise. Because the Stoics knew the mind is full of impressions, not all of them accurate, not all of them useful. And instead of reacting to every mental impulse, they practiced pausing, creating space between the stimulus and the self. They didn't try to control their thoughts. They simply refused to let those thoughts control them. That's not repression, that's awareness. That's the still core beneath the storm. Every day your mind will throw things at you. Worries, regrets, random flashes of fear, old stories you thought you had outgrown, and some days they'll hit hard. They'll feel real. They'll try to convince you that your worth is on trial, that your progress is an illusion, that you're not doing enough. But pause for a second. Notice the space between the thought and your reaction. That space is your freedom, because in that moment you remember. You're not the emotion, you're not the belief. You're the one watching both. And that watcher, that witness, is calm. Not because life is easy, but because it knows what it is, unshaken, unmoved. Not every thought deserves your energy. Not every mental script deserves a performance. You are not obligated to react just because something popped into your mind. You are allowed to say, "I see it. I don't believe it. I choose not to carry it." This mindset doesn't make your thoughts disappear. It makes them powerless over you. It allows you to move through life with more clarity, less fear, and deeper confidence. Not because you've silenced the mind, but because you've stopped mistaking its voice for your identity. And with practice, you start to notice something else. The thoughts that used to shake you now pass like shadows. The anxiety that used to grip you now meets silence. The doubt that used to define you now dissolves before it lands. So if your mind is heavy, if your thoughts feel loud, try this. Don't resist them, don't run from them, just watch. Like waves passing through an ocean that stays still beneath it all. You don't need to fix every thought. You don't need to fight every fear. You only need to remember that you are not the storm. You are the sky. And you were never meant to be ruled by the weather. In a world that never stops talking, silence becomes a revolutionary act. But what you've seen in this journey is more than just the value of stillness. It's the reclaiming of your own mind. Overthinking doesn't make you wiser, it makes you weary. The constant motion doesn't mean progress, it just means you're spinning. True awareness and real clarity only come when you step back, observe, and remember. Your thoughts are not commands, they're options. Stillness isn't a weakness, its strength is under control. It's not escape, it's presence. You don't have to solve every problem today. You don't have to believe every thought that shows up. You only need to pause, to notice, to choose. Because you are not the noise, you are the one who notices it. And in that noticing, you gain power. Not the loud kind, but the grounded kind that lasts. Practice that noticing, 10 minutes a day. No phone, no soundtrack. Just you and the silence you used to avoid. Let the noise rise and let it pass. The more you train your mind to sit without chasing, the more clarity becomes your default, not just in thought, but in action, in emotion, in life. And if this message struck something in you, don't keep it quiet. Share your story in the comments. Someone else might be stuck in the same noise you just stepped out of. Your awareness might help them find theirs.